Warning. The following video contains strong language that some viewers may find offensive or disturbing.
What is one memory that never fails to make you smile every time you think about it? My mom found out she had stage 4 lung cancer when I was 2 and passed away when I was 6. When she got diagnosed, she was given 6 months to live, so, needless to say, she gave us lots of amazing memories and really lived in the moment. The one story I always tell when talking about my mom was how one day she let me and my older sister stay home. Which was a big deal in 1st and 3rd grade already. We went to Bulk Barn and got every item we wanted. When we got home, we snuggled in my parents' bed, spread out what felt like a never-ending amount of bags of chocolate, candy, and watched Disney movies all afternoon. When my dad came home from work, he just jumped right in and joined us. It was right before she went into hospice and the last good day I remember her having before she passed, so the memory holds a special place in my heart. About a year ago, was in a discount grocery store. I had about $20 left after bills and rent. So was having to carefully pick what to buy. In the end, after umming and ahhing for a couple of minutes over whether I could afford to spend $6 on coffee, I put it back on the shelf and went to the register. As I'm walking out OFD the shop, I hear a woman call after me, "Young man. You forgot the C." Turn around and she thrusts the jar of coffee into my bag. I go to protest and she cuts me off saying, "I remember what it was like. Not having enough money and having to go without. You take that coffee and enjoy it, mate." The biggest smile on her face. She was like a beacon of light during one of my darkest times. And I always remember her. With every cup of coffee I can't help but smile, because now each cup reminds me there are truly good people in the world. This reminds me of a story. My son got pneumonia when he was 5. He was in the hospital for 4 days and they finally sent us home with $400 worth of prescriptions. His Medicaid had gotten messed up somehow and turns out he was uninsured. We were broke AF at the time and had just paid the mortgage, so $400 wasn't in the cards. I had about $250 to my name. I drove around to different pharmacies trying to see if it was cheaper. About the 8th pharmacy I went to, the pharmacist said, "Let me check the price," went in the back and handed me the prescriptions and just smiled. I tried to ask how much they cost and he just kept smiling. I'll never forget that guy. I am a 6'3", 250 pounds construction worker and I cried all the way home. Thinking about my cat, Cricket, and how he loved hanging out with me in my garage. Like he was my assistant working on the car or sat with me during rainstorms. He was so much fun. When my friend got hit in the face with a piece of broccoli at a hibachi restaurant. This made me remember that for my birthday one year I went to a restaurant called Honor in Montreal with my sister and some friends. The waitstaff is people who are blind. And you eat in the dark. My sister managed to throw a mushroom at me and hit me right in the middle of my forehead. Of course I threw one back. But in the dark I missed. And could not tell where it went. About 5 minutes later we just hear, "There's something slimy on my chair," from someone who had just been seated. We about died laughing. Also, being sung happy birthday in complete darkness takes all the awkwardness out of it. No one's staring at you and you don't have to look at anyone, anything. My daughter was born in July. The following fall she often would cry at night. I would wrap her in a blanket and take her for a walk. Moments after we got into the cool fall air, she would fall asleep but I would make the walk last as long as I could. Now every fall when the first cool evening hits I smile and often take a walk. Edit, she's now 38. The first time my daughter spoke an intelligible word. She woke up in the morning and looking at me said, "Papa, the funny part is that my wife had, according to her, the perfect plan," she would say, repeatedly, to the baby, the word "Papa." Then, supposedly, when the baby would need anything she would call me and not my wife. It worked until certain point. Now she's jealous that the first word was Papa. But, when the baby wants something she calls for her mommy. Most of the times. The last afternoon I spent with my grandma. She was such a firecracker. Always joking around and giving people the bird. We had a great time. Just the two of us. She passed away in September 2019. About 2 months after her husband. I miss them both, but thinking about that last afternoon with her always makes me smile. That sounds so nice. My grandma passed away Tuesday and I was unable to go tell her bye or anything because the virus. It made the funeral very frustrating not being able to hug anyone. Edit, thank you all for your support. I genuinely appreciate it. My favorite childhood memory is, and always will be, sitting at the kitchen table having a coffee with my mom. We would just sit and talk for hours about everything over a pot of coffee. Truthfully, every time I have a coffee I think of those times and smile. That probably contributes to my caffeine addiction. I need a coffee to get through my day has totally different meaning for me. That joyful thought always rights whatever wrong is going on. She lives several states away now and is getting older. I don't know how many coffee talks we have left. But I'll always have the ones we've already had. You can always start a tradition of phone and coffee pots. Both make coffee and sit and talk. I know it isn't the same. But sometimes making that time just to talk and ramble makes all the difference. I did arts and crafts, story time, etc. as a volunteer at the Children's Hospital. Definitely when my favorite kid found a bone marrow donor. They have a large golden bell at the front of the ward that kids ring when they finish chemotherapy. She hadn't finished yet, but she just went up to the bell and karate chopped it. My mom would sing and dance in the kitchen every Sunday morning when I was growing up. Times were always tough and money was always tight, but my mom always made sure we were happy and healthy. One particular day when I was 8, I was woken up by the sound of Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive" blasting through the house and my mom singing off-key. As I walked to the kitchen, the smell of chorizo and eggs filled the air, and there I saw her. My mom, who only a few days earlier looked so miserable with her life, was dancing her heart out with a spatula in hand. When she passed away 7 years later, I cried every time I thought of her. Except for this memory. This is the only memory that got me through her death. It not only makes me smile every time I think of it, but it's my favorite memory of all time because I'm so lucky to remember her for who she was. Edit, I was given the Gold Award. Thank you so much, kind stranger. It's my first. And wow, this is getting a lot of upvotes too. Thank you all. One time my brother said something funny while I was eating cereal and I had a huge mouthful of unchewed mini wheats and milk and I started to laugh, but then my sister said something funnier and then I thought of the most epic funny thing to say, but I was trapped in the state of laughter, trying not to spit out or choke on my food. Which actually made me laugh even harder because of the situation I was in. Then my brother looks at me like, WTF is wrong with you, and I just point at him and then my sister and then myself, and it was so stupid and I just fell to the floor crying with laughter. I got to spend an entire week staying with my grandmother once when I was a child. That week was the best since I love my grandmother. We would scrapbook, sew, bake cookies, and do puzzles together. I was so happy to be able to spend time with her like that. She was my favorite person in the world. I loved my grandmother so much that when I was a little kid, what I wanted to be when I grew up was a grandmother. She's no longer alive, so I'm relearning how to sew during the quarantine and am going to make a quilt with some of her old quilt blocks. I've told this story on here before, but I used to work for a landscaping company cutting grass in industrial parks. One day I was cutting a huge piece of lawn after a light rain, and stirred up a bunch of bugs. Some swallows must have noticed and went on a sort of feeding frenzy all around me for like 1/2 hour. I would be riding along and a bird would swoop what felt like inches from my head, and then spiral all around to catch more bugs. After watching them for a minute or so, I knew they wouldn't crash into me. So it was like being given a private air show. Any memory with my grandpa? Well, he technically isn't my real grandpa, but he's who I grew up with my whole life. The man was hard-working, loving, funny, and every positive aspect you'd ever want in a grandpa. But there's one memory that stands out. 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, and Alzheimer's. They weren't diagnosed together, but he took those diseases to the grave. It was too much for him to be awake during all of it. So they medically induced a coma that he never woke up from. Throughout all of it, he never moved a muscle. The quiet sounds of his breathing were all we heard. At one point, my sister was by his side in tears. Like the rest of us. Out of nowhere, he reached up with his arm and gave my sister a hug. No one else got any actions from him. Not even my grandma. It's a memory none of us will forget. Especially not my sister. He died on March 4th, 2014, and our family gets together for ice cream on that date. Along with his birthday, to celebrate his life. He didn't deserve the pain he went through one bit. But I have no doubt that his loved ones greeted him with a smile when it was all over. I love you, Grandpa. Edit. Wow, almost 1,000 upvotes. Thanks for all the support. I wasn't even expecting it. My brother and I went to the dollar store one day and went through every aisle and put anything in the cart that we thought was cool. We kinda messed around and ended up putting away 80% of it. But I don't hang out one-on-one with him much. So it made me happy. Back in college, I was eating at Chipotle with my friend Anthony, who is typically a pretty suave guy. As we were talking, he was alternating between taking sips of his beer and dumping Tabasco on his burrito before taking a bite. He gets lost in our conversation and I see him grab the Tabasco and start bringing it to his lips before catching himself and grabbing his beer instead. Then I see him do it again, getting even closer to his mouth this time before realizing his mistake. He laughs it off. Another minute goes by and, exceeding all expectations, he grabs his beer and pours it into his burrito. I worked as a homeless street outreach worker for a couple years. My coworker and I saw a guy standing near a river. We felt something wasn't right and parked. My coworker and I convinced the person that killing themselves isn't worth it. A few weeks later that person confronted my coworker and thanked him for being there that night. That person had found an apartment and felt that their life was finally gotten on track. Pretty sure it was a dream or something I imagined. I remember walking down a dirt road with heavy swamp vegetation, reeds mostly, growing on both sides and dense tree branches hanging over the road around 10 a.m. in the end of June with patches of sunshine barely making it to the dirt below. I was a kid and was walking with a friend. It's where I go when I need to calm down. If I remember it. Watching my aunt make tamales with her sisters and mom on Christmas Eve. She was so happy and it was when she was at her best. Laughing and smiling. Fun times. I miss her a lot. My father was diagnosed with brain cancer and given a few months to live. He beat the odds again and again, and the memory of him and my mother dancing at my wedding will always make me smile. He was supposed to be dead so many times before that. Me remembering the last time I saw my mom alive. She was sitting in her chair where she existed for 90% of her last couple of years. Watching Netflix and YouTube. I hugged her, exactly 6 days before she died. There's a few, but one is super heartwarming to me. For context, my grandparents were always super religious and fairly old-fashioned. But they were cool with it. If they saw something they didn't like, you know what they'd do? They'd give you smile, tell you to have a good life in a sweet way, and go on their way. One day, as most little kids do, I drew a picture. It was of an alien on Earth saying, "Wowie. I am on Earth." I gave it to my grandpa. Instead of throwing it away and lecturing me about the Bible like most people I knew would. He hung it up on the wall next to his side of the bed. It was still there. Around 10 years later, when he died, it was still there. Around 4 to 5 years after his death. When Grandma died, my stupid little drawing, drawn by a little kid and given to a person who could have thrown it away, was put in a place of honor for the majority of the time I knew my grandparents. I'm crying right now. I'm gonna have to go up there and see if it's still there and ask if I can have it. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. See you next time.